Freaky Beaky Bird, a once upon a time story in evolution. Once upon a time, there was a group of birds that lived on this exotic continent. But far, far away was this beautiful island that they could never get to. And some of them tried, but they could never succeed. They waited for the day where the wind got really, really strong. And then one day, that day occurred. That's the island. The winds got really, really strong, and the birds were able to take flight and get in the air. And they headed towards an island that was far away. Some of them turned back, but a few of them were able to get so high in the sky and ride the winds that they were able to sail all the way to the island and eventually land there. And they noticed that it was very much like where they were from. And that's where they landed, on that side of the island. There were lush trees and plenty of seeds, just like their homeland, and fresh water and brooks and streams. But the sad part was they could never make it back home. So they waited for the day where it got really, really windy so they can go back home. But that day never came. That group, they're called the founders. So they ate and they had babies. And then eventually, over time, they became a separate species. We call that geographic isolation. Then time passed. Hundreds of years went by. And they were now really different from the group in which they came from. That's called speciation, making a new species. Here's some examples of birds that look very similar, but they're considered separate species because of geographic isolation. The eastern and western meadowlark. Right here you have the flicker. On the east coast, the flicker has yellow feathers. On the west coast, red or orange. And then in the middle, it's in between. Well, time passed again, and their population grew and grew. And it started getting really, really crowded where they lived. And some of them were looking for a place to go. Luckily, it got hot. And when it got hot, the ice mountains that prevented them from getting on the other side of the mountain melted. So a group of them was able to fly and land on the other side of the mountain. When they got there, they noticed that the environment was totally different from where they lived. There were conifers or evergreens, pine trees, really hard food to eat. The water wasn't as docile, it was rapids, even though it was fresh. Well, it started getting late and the sun started to set, so they decided to settle in for the night. And then the next day, they would go back to their side of the island. But what happened was it got really, really cold that night. And the snow came back on the mountains, so they couldn't go back. And they waited and waited for that warm day to come, but it didn't happen for a really long time. And their populations grew and grew and grew and grew. And they became, so then one day it finally did get warm, hundreds of years later. And then there was a group that decided they've heard about the population on the other side of the mountain, and they were going to go and check them out, see their distant cousins. So they got there, and when they noticed, they looked a lot like themselves, but they had different types, and they tried to talk and communicate, but they had different types of songs and different types of dances. It's kind of all strange to them. How can we look alike, but we can't communicate? When I try to dance with them, I can't dance with them. You know what? This isn't working out. So they decided to go back. But what we call this reproductive isolation. So even though they look alike, for whatever reason, they can't reproduce because they have different songs and different dances, different rituals. So night came and it started getting cold again. So they decided we better head back home before it gets too cold and we can't make it. So they flew back, but it was getting dark. They couldn't make it back all the way. And then the temperatures dropped. So they settled on the top of the mountain and they just made it past before the snow came back. And they spent the night, because it was cold, in bushes, and they huddled close together. Luckily, there was a food source there, so they just started to eat and eat and eat. But what they didn't know was that those berries were poison, but not for all of them. So when they woke up the next morning, some of them were gone. So the few that were left, they went back to their original island, their original population, and they had to tell everybody the bad news. Over time, they kind of felt isolated because they were known as that group. They went to the other side of the island, and everyone kept on reminding of the bad things that happened. Well, instead of feeling bad about themselves, they knew that they could eat the berries and survive, so they went back. They found the bush and they found the berries. They were able to feed their kids the berries, and then time passed again for them. And now their populations grew and grew and grew. Now we had 3 populations, actually 4. The one from the mainland, the one on the first side of the island, and the second side of the island, now this 3rd population. We call that adaptive radiation. That's what Darwin discovered. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. But there was a piece of the puzzle that was missing, something Darwin didn't know about. That was genetics, the program inside of us who determines who we are. Well, he also didn't know that mutations can occur. Well, one day, a mutation did occur. That's Freaky Beaky Bird. Freaky Beaky Bird lived on the other side of the island. But he couldn't eat any of the food or drink any of the food because of his freaky beak. But luckily, he had a mom who took care of him and fed him and helped him grow. And over time, he got pretty big. But nobody really wanted to talk to him because he had such a freaky beak. None of the girls would have anything to do with him, except for that one girl, Geeky Bird. So what happened? Well, he just got tired of not fitting in. So he heard about the cousins that lived in the bush that ate the poison berry. So he figured, let me go see if I can get along with them. But he couldn't eat the berries there because of his freaky beak, and there was nobody there to feed him. Plus, they didn't like him anyway because he had such a freaky beak. So he decided he was going to try to get to the other side of the island because he heard that there was a population over there. And he thought he could withstand the cold. So he went, and he was able to withstand the cold. And he arrived at the other population, but the same thing happened. Everyone thought he was weird because he had a freaky beak. Well, it was getting dark, and he figured, well, at least I could head home, and Mom will take care of me. So what did he do? He decided to go back. When he was on his way home, he found this flower that his beak could fit in perfectly. And he started eating the nectar and eating the nectar, and he stayed there and kept on eating and eating. And over time, Freaky Beaky Bird got big and strong. Well, he knew now it was time to go back and let everyone know that he was okay. Freaky Beaky Bird went back, and all the girls saw him and was like, woo, who's this guy? This stud muffin over here. But he didn't want anything to do with them because he remembers when they were mean to him. But there was one bird that he really, really liked. He was hoping she was still around, Geeky Bird, and she was still there and still single. Well, they fell in love, and then they decided they were going to start their own family. But he had a secret he had to share. So he took Beaky Bird to his secret spot right over there with the special flowers. And just like his mom took care of him, he took care of her and he fed them and he had a family. And then since he fed them special food, she turned into this beautiful bird. They had all these kids with freaky beaks and who were beautiful. And they lived happily ever after. Well, let's review what we learned. You had the first group that flew in from the island with the winds. They were known as the founders. That was group number one. Group number two were the founders. They were created by geographic isolation. Their gene pool started to change over time and they became new species. And you had group three, which was reproductive isolation. So even though they looked alike, they had different songs and different dances and they couldn't reproduce anymore. Then you had continued evolution with the bird that were able to eat the berries and survive. They were the angry birds. And then you had the mutation, which was Freaky Beaky Bird. And he was able to create a new population of birds. So from one population, because of evolution, you now had 5 different populations of birds. The end.